Imagine you are a small mammal. You're living in South America, roughly 30 million years ago. You weigh maybe 12 kilograms. You eat roots, insects, the occasional lizard. Life is manageable. Then you hear it, something stranger, a deep, percussive thud. Then another, rhythmic, getting closer. You freeze, and then you see it. It stands 3 meters tall. Its legs are like columns of pale bone wrapped in tight muscle. Its neck stretches upward and then curves forward, ending in a skull the size of a horse's head, fitted at the front with a beak that hooks downward like a meat hook made of calcium. It is not looking at you yet. Then it is, and it runs at 50 kilometers per hour. You do not escape. Welcome to 60 million years of absolute, unchallenged, apex dominance. Welcome to the age of the terror birds. To understand why the terror birds became what they became, you have to understand the world they were born into, and specifically, the catastrophic vacancy that world had just created, 66 million years ago. The asteroid that ended the Cretaceous didn't just kill the non-avian dinosaurs. It wiped out approximately 75% of all species on Earth. The food chains that had organized life for over 150 million years didn't just break, they dissolved. And into that vacancy, life rushed. In most parts of the world, mammals filled the top of the food chain relatively quickly. Carnivorous mammals, the ancestors of cats, dogs, bears, hyenas, radiated outward from the wreckage of the Cretaceous and started climbing the predator hierarchy. But South America was different. Around the time the dinosaurs went extinct, South America was not connected to North America. There was no Panama land bridge. There was open ocean between the two continents, a seaway that separated them completely. This meant that the placental carnivores spreading across North America, Europe, and Asia, the ones that would eventually evolve into your cats and wolves, could not reach South America. South America was on its own. And into the top of that isolated food chain, something unexpected climbed. Birds. Specifically, one lineage of birds descended from a group called the Caryamids, wading birds related to modern Siryamas, began growing, and growing, and growing. Their flight muscles atrophied, their legs thickened, their beaks evolved into weapons. By approximately 60 million years ago, the family Phorusrhacidae had arrived. The terror birds had begun. Let's spend some time here, because it's worth actually understanding what these animals were, not just the dramatic headline version, but the full biological picture. There were multiple species of Phorusrhacids, spread across tens of millions of years of evolution. They varied in size, in speed, and in hunting strategy, but the general body plan was consistent enough that we can describe it. Start at the bottom. The feet were three-toed and powerful, built for running on open grassland. The legs were proportioned not unlike a modern ostrich, long, muscular, capable of generating significant stride length. Speed estimates for the larger species run between 45 and 50 kilometers per hour. For context, a modern lion can reach about 80 kilometers per hour in a sprint. But only briefly. Terror birds appear to have been built more for sustained chase than pure sprint. Endurance predators covering ground efficiently across open terrain. Move up. The body was compact and dense for a bird, muscular through the chest and thighs, with wings that were essentially vestigial. What remained of the wings were small, bony stubs, possibly used for balance during rapid turns, but functionally useless for flight. These animals had traded the sky for the ground completely and irreversibly. Now the neck. Long, powerful, and flexible. The neck is important because it's part of the killing mechanism. We'll come back to that. And then the head. the skull of Kalenkin guillermoi, the largest known terror bird species. Discovered in Patagonia and named for its Mapuche cultural significance, measured approximately 72 centimeters in length. That is, to be absolutely clear, longer than many adult humans' torsos. It is one of the largest bird skulls ever found in the fossil record. The beak was the weapon. It curved downward at the tip in a pronounced hook, structurally similar to an eagle's beak but vastly larger. The upper mandible was not fused rigidly to the skull in the way many modern bird beaks are. Instead, it had a degree of kinetic flexibility that allowed the beak to move somewhat independently. A feature that appears across many bird lineages and may have helped terror birds absorb the impact forces of their hunting method. And that hunting method deserves its own explanation. Terror birds almost certainly did not chase prey to exhaustion and then slash at it repeatedly, the way a big cat might. The biomechanics don't fully support that. What the skull structure does support, based on stress analysis of bone fossils, is a hunting style involving seizing prey in the beak and then repeatedly slamming it against the ground. Pick it up, slam it down. Pick it up, slam it down. Until the bones collapse, until the internal organs rupture, until the animal stops moving. This is not a slow death. For smaller prey, rodents, early camelids, the various hoofed mammals that shared the South American grasslands, it would have been extremely rapid. The impact forces involved would have been enormous, delivered by an animal weighing up to 130 kilograms, swinging a 70-centimeter skull at the end of a powerful neck. Some researchers have also suggested that the hooked beak tip was used to puncture the skull of prey directly, a coup de grace delivered after immobilization. The fossil evidence is not definitive on this point, but the anatomy is consistent with it. What we can say with confidence, these were not opportunistic scavengers. These were active, specialized, highly effective killing machines. Here is the number that does not fully land until you sit with it. 60 million years. Terror birds dominated the South American grasslands, with varying species appearing, peaking, and declining across geological time for approximately 60 million years. For context, the entire history of the genus Homo, meaning all human ancestors from the earliest Homo habilis to us, spans roughly 2 to 3 million years. The entire history of anatomically modern humans is perhaps 300,000 years. Terror birds ruled South America for 60 million years. During this period, South America's ecosystem evolved around them. Herbivores developed strategies for avoiding detection, for running, for hiding in dense brush. The grassland landscape itself, the pampas and the open savannas, may have been shaped in part by the grazing pressure of the animals terror birds preyed upon, and therefore indirectly by the terror birds themselves. What's interesting ecologically is that terror birds appear to have coexisted with other large predators, particularly the Phorusrhacidae, an order of marsupial-like mammals that included Thylacosmolus, sometimes called the marsupial saber-tooth, which had elongated canines eerily convergent with the later saber-toothed cats of North America. These animals likely occupied somewhat different niches. Phorusrhacidae were ambush predators, working through stealth and power. Terror birds were pursuit predators, working through speed and open ground advantage. They may have avoided direct competition by hunting different prey in different contexts. But over time, the Phorusrhacidae declined, for reasons that are still debated among paleontologists, though competition with placental mammals arriving via island hopping from North America may have played a role. By the time of the Great American Interchange, which we'll get to, the Phorusrhacidae were already gone or nearly so. The terror birds at that point had no competitors at all. They were the only major apex predator left in South America. And that, as it turns out, was exactly the problem. 3 million years ago, something happened that would change everything. Tectonic forces that had been building for millions of years, the slow collision of the Caribbean and Pacific plates, the gradual rise of the Central American volcanic arc, finally pushed enough land above sea level to close the seaway between North and South America. The Panama Isthmus formed. For the first time in tens of millions of years, the two Americas were connected by dry land. What followed is called the Great American Biotic Interchange, or in some literature, simply the Great American Interchange, and it was one of the most consequential ecological events of the past 10 million years. Animals moved in both directions. From South America northward, ground sloths, glyptodonts, armored animals the size of Volkswagens, giant anteaters, toxodons, capybaras, armadillos. Opossums, North American ecosystems absorbed these animals with varying results. Some flourished. Ground sloths spread across the entirety of North America. Glyptodonts reached as far north as Texas. But the movement in the other direction, from North America into South America, was catastrophically asymmetric in its effects. From North America southward came horses, tapirs, deer, mastodons, mammoths, and with them, their predators. Saber-toothed cats, species of the genus Smilodon in their early forms, pumas, bears, specifically Tremarctine bears, including what would become the short-faced bears, possibly the largest terrestrial mammalian carnivores of the Pleistocene. Early canids, ancestors of the direwolf. These animals had spent tens of millions of years evolving in an arms race with large mammalian prey. They were fast. They were intelligent in the predatory behavioral sense. They were flexible, able to adjust hunting strategies. And they had never encountered terrain or prey species quite like what South America offered. More importantly, the prey of South America had never encountered them. Terror birds had spent 60 million years as unchallenged apex predators. In evolutionary terms, this is both an extraordinary success and a profound vulnerability. An apex predator with no natural predators does not develop behavioral or physiological adaptations to being hunted. It does not evolve escape instincts. It does not have the prey detection hardwiring that comes from millions of years of being stalked. It does not have the camouflage, the speed at short range, the defensive structures of an animal that has historically needed to avoid being eaten. Terror birds were killers. They were not built to be killed. The saber-toothed cats arriving from North America were ambush predators. They worked in cover, from concealment with explosive short-range speed. They targeted large prey by isolating individuals, by coordinated approaches, by using terrain. A terror bird's threat detection was built around what it had always faced, smaller mammals trying to run from it in open ground. The very landscape where terror birds had dominated, open grassland, became the terrain where they were most exposed to ambush predators using grass and scrub for cover. We don't have a precise timeline for how quickly the terror birds collapsed after the interchange. The fossil record for the period is incomplete in ways that make exact dating difficult. What we can say is this: Phorusrhacidae fossils become increasingly sparse after the formation of the land bridge, and the genus appears to have gone effectively extinct approximately 2 to 2.5 million years ago. Within 1 million years of the interchange beginning, possibly faster. For a lineage that had lasted 60 million years, the end came quickly. There are a handful of fascinating footnotes here. One species, Titanus walleri, appears to have actually moved northward across the land bridge into North America. Fossils have been found in Texas and Florida dated to approximately 2 million years ago. Terror birds, in other words, were not purely passive recipients of the interchange. At least one species tried to expand. But Titanes walleri also went extinct. Whatever advantage terror birds held in their home ecosystem did not transfer reliably to an environment where they were competing against and potentially being preyed upon by mammals with tens of millions of years of evolutionary history in those ecosystems. The experiment failed. The Great American Interchange was not just the story of terror birds. It was a wholesale reorganization of two continents' ecosystems, one of the largest ecological reshufflings documented in the fossil record of the last 10 million years. And the results were deeply unequal. When researchers analyze which groups survived and which went extinct across the interchange, a striking pattern emerges. Of the large mammalian herbivores that were endemic to South America, the native horses, the native camelids, the toxodons, the litopterns, the vast majority went extinct. Some of these extinctions were directly or indirectly caused by competition with the incoming North American herbivores. Some may have been caused by the new predators. The picture is almost certainly more complex than a single cause. But the scoreboard is stark. North American immigrants fared significantly better in South America than South American animals fared in North America. Why? The leading hypothesis is what's called the biotic fairy asymmetry. North America, connected to Eurasia via the Bering Land Bridge throughout much of this period, had been continuously receiving species from the world's largest landmass, Asia and Europe, throughout the Cenozoic. North American fauna were, in a sense, the products of a much larger evolutionary testing ground. They had been competing against and being shaped by a broader diversity of species than their South American counterparts. South American fauna had been isolated. They had evolved remarkable things, terror birds, glyptodonts, giant ground sloths, but they had done so in a contained evolutionary arena. When that arena suddenly opened into a much larger competitive landscape, many of them lost. The terror birds are perhaps the most dramatic single case, but they were not the only casualty. Here's what's interesting. Not everything from South America's pre-interchange ecosystem went extinct. Opossums crossed into North America and are still here. The Virginia opossum is now found across most of the continental United States. A direct descendant of the South American marsupials that crossed the land bridge. Armadillos crossed northward and now range into the American South and Midwest. Porcupines, capybaras in their southern range, giant anteaters in Central and South America, fragments of the old South American fauna persist, and birds as a class clearly survived the interchange just fine. Modern South America has extraordinary avian diversity. The Andean condor, the harpy eagle, the various species of rhea, large ecologically significant birds living in the terrain the terror birds once dominated. But no bird, anywhere on Earth today, occupies the apex predator niche the terror birds held. The closest living relatives of terror birds are the Siriemas, small, ground-running birds of the South American grasslands that hunt insects, lizards, and small rodents. They still perform a vestigial version of the slamming behavior, picking up prey and whacking it against the ground. A ghost of the motion their enormous ancestors used to kill animals many times their size. When you see a Siriema slam a snake into the dirt, you are watching 60 million years of evolutionary memory compressed into a bird the size of a large chicken. The killing behavior survived. The killing machine didn't. There's a temptation, when you tell this story, to frame the terror birds as failures. They dominated for 60 million years, and then they collapsed in under a million. But I think that framing gets it wrong. 60 million years is not a failure. 60 million years is a longer run than anything your imagination can honestly hold. The terror birds were not defeated by weakness. They were defeated by a specific vulnerability. The vulnerability that comes with being so perfectly adapted to one context that you have no margin when the context changes. This is not a flaw unique to terror birds. It is a fundamental tension in evolutionary biology. Extreme specialization produces extreme effectiveness in stable conditions and extreme fragility when conditions shift. The land bridge didn't just bring new predators into South America. It brought a new kind of evolutionary selection pressure, one the terror birds had literally never encountered in their entire 60 million year history. And they had no time to adapt. A million years sounds long, but when you're talking about evolving new defensive behaviors, new threat detection instincts, new physiological responses to being stalked by a category of predator your lineage has never seen, a million years may not be enough. Evolution works on the time scale of reproduction. Terror birds were large animals with presumably slow reproductive rates. The selection pressure arrived faster than the adaptation could. The saber-toothed cats didn't know they were winning. The terror birds didn't know they were losing. There was no drama, just the slow, invisible arithmetic of survival. The grasslands of Patagonia still exist. They look, in some ways, not entirely unlike what they looked like 3 million years ago. But they are quiet now in a way they weren't then. The thud of something enormous slamming prey into the earth. The deep, percussive rhythm. Gone, the terror birds held South America for 60 million years. They were 3 meters tall, ran at 50 kilometers per hour, and killed by slamming their prey into the ground with a skull the size of a horse's head. They had no predators. They had no competition. And when the land bridge formed and the world outside arrived, the world they had never been required to adapt to, it was already too late. That's the story of Phorusrhacidae, one of the longest apex predator reigns in the history of vertebrate life on this planet, and one of the fastest endings. If you want to go deeper on the Great American Interchange and which South American species actually crossed north and survived and which didn't, that's a whole separate story. Let me know in the comments if you want that one next. Subscribe if you're new. The channel covers this kind of deep-time natural history, the long stories, the slow catastrophes, the things that happened over millions of years that never make it into a headline. See you in the next one.